All right, the first thing you need to understand about Django ORM is the concept of managers and query sets. So let's press Command and T on Mac or Control and T on Windows and jump to our say hello function. So we're going to go back to our playground and write all the code here. Now for this section, we don't really need the calculate function, so I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to delete this line as well. Now on the top, from store.models, we're going to import the product class. Now every model in Django has an attribute called objects, and this returns a manager object. A manager is an interface to the database. It's like a remote control with a bunch of buttons that we can use to talk to our database. So here we have a bunch of methods for querying or updating data. For example, we have all for pulling out all the objects in the products table. We also have get for getting a single object. We have filter for filtering data and so on. Now, most of these methods, like the all method, return a query set. So when we call this method, we don't get a list of products. We get a query set object. A query set is an object that encapsulates a query. So at some point, Django is going to evaluate this query set, and this is when Django will generate the right SQL statement to send to our database. But when will this happen? Well, under a few scenarios. One scenario is when we iterate over a query set. So if you write code like for product in query set, at this moment, Django will evaluate this query set and get the result from the database. So for this demo, let's just print the product on the terminal. I'll save the changes. Back in the browser, here on the hello page, let's refresh. Okay, now let's open Django debug toolbar. So look at the SQL tab. Over here, you can see the actual SQL statements that Django sent to our database. So here we have 3 queries. The first 2 are just used by Django to do its job. The third query is our select statement to get all the products from the products table. So let's expand this. This is the exact query that Django has sent to our database. So select ID, title, slug, and other fields from product table. Now over here, we can click on the select button to see the actual result that is returned from the database. So this is very useful when debugging applications. Now back to our code. So one scenario where a query set is evaluated is when we iterate over it. Another scenario is when we convert it to a list. So if we call the list function and give it this query set will be evaluated. Another scenario is when we access an individual element, like the first element, or when we slice this. So if we use the slice operator and pick the first 5 elements, then the query set will be evaluated. So because of this, we say query sets are lazy, which means they're evaluated at a later point. Now you might be wondering why query sets are lazy. Why doesn't Django simply call the database the moment we call the all method? Well, the reason for this is that we can use query set methods to build complex queries. So over here, we can call query set.filter to filter the result, and this will return a new query set. So once again, the query is not going to get evaluated at this point. So we get a new query set, and then right away we can call the filter method to apply a second filter. Then similarly, we can call the order by method to sort the result. So by chaining all these methods, we'll build a complex query, and at some point when we iterate over that query or convert it to a list, that query will be evaluated. Now imagine if query sets were not lazy. The moment we call the all method, the query would be evaluated, and this would result in thousands or even millions of objects returned from the database. But what if you were only interested in a subset of these products? Then calling the filter method would filter the objects in memory. So we would get thousands or millions of objects, we'll store them in memory and throw most of them out. So to recap, every model has an attribute called objects, which returns a manager, which is an interface to the database. Now, the manager has a bunch of methods for querying and updating data. Most of these methods, like the all method, return a query set. Now, in contrast, we have some other methods that return result immediately. For example, we have the count method, which returns the number of records in the product table. Now, why don't we get a query set here? Well, because this method returns a number, so it doesn't really make sense to do something extra with that number. We're not going to apply a filter to it. We're not going to sort the result or build a complex query around it. So this was the basics of managers and query sets. As we go through the section, you will learn more about these query sets. Next, we're going to talk about retrieving objects in detail.